Can you still get a slice of pizza in New York City for $1? Probably not. But with that same $1, you can buy about 30% of a 20-story office building on Park Avenue in New York City. How is that possible? Let's take a look. So many of you have probably seen these stories about people being able to buy abandoned homes in Italy for like $1 each. Like this article says, 3 abandoned homes bought for $3.30. And here's another article where people are buying $1 house in Italy, but they have to renovate it. Now, I grew up in New York City, so I remember back when you could still buy a whole building in New York City for $1. And that was in the 1980s and early 90s in places like the Lower East Side and Alphabet City. There were these abandoned buildings and they had squatters living in them. And the city eventually sold these buildings to the squatters for like $1. Now there was all kinds of stipulations that they had to fix it up and renovate it and all that kind of thing. But today in New York City, that's no longer the case. And that's because this Canadian pension fund sold their 29% share in this office tower at 360 Park Avenue South for $1. Before we look at the details of this sale, let's just look at the difference in home prices on an index going back to 1975, comparing Canada and the US of home prices versus disposable income. And this is where the US is at about an index of 200 with disposable income a little bit higher than that. Whereas in Canada, the disposable income is about 200 on the index, while home prices are about 350. So Canadian home prices are a lot more expensive. Maybe that's why this Canadian pension fund wanted to invest in the US. And so here they say the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board has recently done 3 deals at deeply discounted prices. So 2 of them were in Vancouver, 1 was in Southern California, and the one in this video is the Manhattan office tower that shocked the industry. They sold their stake for just $1. So this was the end of 2023. They sold their 29% stake in the 360 Park Avenue South for $1 to one of their partners, Boston Properties. Now, in this sale, they also assumed the share of the pension fund's debt. Now, one of the other investors in this building is the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund. And the strange thing is they bought this building in 2021 with plans to redevelop it into a modern workspace. So this was already during the pandemic, but before the big rise in interest rates. Now, Bloomberg said the Canadian Pension Fund already spent $71 million on the project, but severed its ties to release it from an obligation to commit an additional $46 million to the effort. So in other words, they paid some amount of money for this building. It doesn't say how much. Then the pension fund spent $71 million and was on the hook to spend another $46 million. And they just said, let's just walk away, burn this $71 million and at least save the $46 million that we're not going to have to spend going forward. So this is the building on Park Avenue South between 25th and 26th Street. And it says, a restored building, kind to you and the environment. Well, I guess it's not restored yet. So why did they dump that building and walk away from the money they already invested? Part of it could be that they don't have much hope to get that building filled. This is a forecast from Goldman Sachs of office vacancy rates. And you see the actual vacancy rates from 2000 after the internet bubble went up to about 12%. Right now, we're at about almost 14%, and Goldman Sachs is forecasting the vacancy rate to go up to 18% by 2033. Now, just to be clear, they did not sell this whole building for $1. They only sold 29% of it. So if you do the math, it actually comes out to the building is worth $3.44. Now, all joking aside, you're not going to go around buying buildings for $1 in Manhattan anytime soon. This is really just them walking away and handing the keys back to the bank. But in this case, their partner decided to take on their portion of the debt that's owed for when they bought this building. Now, this is not an uncommon thing. During the great financial crisis, many homeowners would send their keys back to the bank because their houses were so underwater, they had no more equity in it, and it was cheaper for them to go rent the exact house on the same block than it was to keep paying their mortgage. And so they would hand the bank back the keys. So they would call it jingle mail, where you would put the keys in an envelope and send it back to the bank and walk away from the house. That's basically what this pension fund did. Now, this doesn't mean that all office spaces in New York City are not worth anything. This building is an older building, and it's kind of categorized as like a non-viable building. And here's what that means. So let's look at the transaction prices of non-viable offices. And that's defined as offices either in a suburban area or central business district that was built before 1990 and has not had a renovation since 2000 and has a vacancy rate higher than 30%. So the light blue is 2019, the dark blue is 2023. So San Francisco's seen a drop of 35% in actual transactions of these non-viable offices, where New York has seen a drop of 12% so far. And so the source for all these data are these different companies, and so they have different ways of measuring the change in office prices since 2019, from as little as 8 or 7% to as much as about 37%. So the reason there's not a lot of transactions to understand what the true price should be is because most of these holders are holding out hope that either interest rates fall or their vacancies fall, and so they get some long-term tenants in these buildings to help pay the mortgage, and they're going to have to refinance the mortgage at a higher interest rate soon. So these are all problems that they're having, and the banks are helping them along. And as you see, this is a survey, year-end survey 2022 versus year-end 2023, of how much in commercial mortgage maturities are outstanding. So at the end of 2022, they said for 2023, it'll be about 700 billion. But at the end of 2023, they're saying it's only 100 billion. Why is that? Because the banks help them extend and pretend, meaning they let them extend the terms of their loan another year in the hopes that interest rates go lower, and so these owners don't walk away and leave the banks holding the bag with these buildings that they can't sell. So you see the amount of mortgage maturities are like 900 billion for 2024, according to the year-end 2023 survey, which is about $250 billion higher than the survey just 1 year before that. So what does this all mean? It means there is still a lot of pain that is going to come for the banks holding these mortgages on especially these non-viable type older buildings in these big cities like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, etc. And now most people will logically say, well, we got all these millions of people showing up here for some reason. Why don't we just put them in those buildings and remake them residential and all of that kind of thing? That is easier said than done. It is very expensive to redo these office buildings and turn them into residential. In fact, some of these articles are saying that the value of these buildings, they're being sold basically for the land under them, meaning the building is not worth anything, and it is likely that it will be torn down because it is cheaper to tear it down and build a residential building than it is to retrofit an office building into residential in most cases. However, if people buy these buildings at a big enough discount, it may be cheap enough for them to put the money in to turn them into residential eventually. But when these buildings sell at big discounts of 50, 60%, somebody is going to take a hit on that. And most likely it's not going to be the companies that bought these buildings because they're going to walk away and write off whatever down payment they put into the building. It's going to be the banks that take the hit. And so if interest rates don't fall fast enough or don't fall at all in the next year or so, the banks may not be able to extend and pretend these loans for the owners of these buildings. And so there may be a lot more forced distressed selling of these type of buildings. And like the late Charlie Munger said, the buildings don't go away, only the owners do.